the dark hours when crime invades the streets of Gotham City, a fateful beam invades the midnight sky. The bat signal! Moments later, from the hidden Batcave beneath the Wayne Mansion, an ominous shape roars forth. It's the Batmobile.
Police reads and skin.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Andy's Batman Podcast, the podcast that is about Batman that is hosted by Andy. Again, it's fairly self-explanatory. It's right there in the title. I don't really feel like I have to go into great amounts of detail, but I need an intro for the show, so I've got to say something. Maybe I should take some time to write an intro. No, I haven't got that kind of time. I barely have time to record this. Well, anyway, let's get going here. This is the second episode of the show that I've recorded, and for the second episode, I wanted to take some time to talk about some comic books. You see, folks, Batman is a very popular character in many different forms of media, movies, cartoons, television, literature, video games, of course, even popular music. See, Prince. But Batman, of course, as we all know, started out in the comic books way back in 1939, Detective Comics number 27, famous issue. Since then, he's appeared in literally thousands of different comics, from his own title, Batman, to his original book, Detective. He had a Superman team-up title back in the 40s called World's Finest, The Batman Family, Legends of the Dark Knight, Shadow of the Bat, Gotham Knight, Streets of Gotham, Batman and Robin. There's so many different Batman comics, I couldn't even tell you all of them off the top of my head. But today, what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk about one of my favorite collections of Batman comics. For those of you out there who don't read or collect comic books, let me explain what I mean by a collection. Comic books, typically, your average comic is published month to month in those little kind of magazine-style floppy paper books that you see on the racks. That's the way that most people, read and encounter comics. But people that are collectors like myself, or people that are just, casual readers that prefer to read it this way, will sometimes buy them in collected editions. That's sort of like a bookshelf, kind of with a whole kind of like a bookshelf edition with like several different stories all packed into one collection. I'm going to use that word collection far more than I would like to use it today. I'm sorry, folks. I'm a little tired. I'm a little out of it. It's a bit early in the morning. I have a lot of other stuff I have to get done today. So, because I'm leaving town for a week after I finish recording this show. So, trying to maybe a little bit unfocused. So I apologize. Fortunately, though, I had the wherewithal to get myself a glass of water before I started the show. So, I won't have to worry about getting dry mouth this time like I did the first time. But anyway, back to comic book collections. There are so many, comic books, there are so many different Batman comic book collections out there. The particular one that I'll be looking at today is from the DC Comics Classics Library, which is a series of hardcover collections of comic books, mostly from the Golden Age and the Silver Age. And what I mean by the Golden Age and the Silver Age is the Golden Age of comics is usually thought to have begun with Action Comics number 1, the first appearance of Superman in 1938, and runs all the way through the 40s and ends sometime around the middle of the 1950s. It's kind of foggy when exactly it ends, or when exactly, the Silver Age of comics, which begins right around the middle of the 1950s, starts. And the Silver Age of comics ran from right around the middle of the 50s to about the end of the 1960s. It was certainly over by 1970. That's usually when all comic book fans agree that the Bronze Age began. But we're not going to be talking about Bronze Age stuff tonight. We're going to be talking about some wonderful Golden/Silver Age Batman comics. This collection that I have is called the Batman Annuals, and it collects the first 3 issues of the Batman Annuals. Now, back in the early 1960s, so again, this is kind of like mid-Silver Age of mid-Silver Age comics, DC Comics started to publish these great, big, fat 80-page issues that kind of collected some of the best Batman stories and Superman stories and The Flash and Wonder Woman. They did a whole bunch of them. They did Superman first, obviously. Superman always gets there first. But it wasn't too long before Batman followed in his wake. The first Batman Annual is a collection of a whole bunch of different stories. I got the, you can probably hear the paper right here to my left. You probably can't tell it's to my left. I don't know. Is there surround sound on this microphone? I'm just starting podcasting again. I don't know what's going on. But you can probably hear the paper. This first issue of the Batman Annual is from 1962 or 63, somewhere thereabouts. And it collects, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It collects 7 whole Batman stories. Most of them were published in the late 1940s and early 1950s. So this Silver Age collection actually collects a lot of Golden Age stories, or late Golden Age, early Silver Age stories. To give you an idea of what Batman comics were like back in those days, the earliest Batman comics, sort of like the 1939, the first year of Batman comics, were pretty dark, pretty grim, pretty serious, kind of crime noir / supernatural mystery stories. Mostly written by Bill Finger, and a lot of them contributed by Gardner Fox, who was also a writer. Right around 1940, 1941, mostly in 1940 actually, the tone of the Batman comics underwent a major shift. They introduced Robin, the Boy Wonder, Dick Grayson, Batman's, the very first comic book kid sidekick, and of course Batman's first sidekick. And of course, because Robin is a much more lighthearted character and because he has a more colorful costume, he sort of altered the tone and the dynamic of the comic stories. And it made them a lot more lighthearted, a lot more about action and, punch-em-ups and thrilling escapes and all the kind of exciting goings-on that Batman does occasionally. I'm losing my train of thought. Oh boy. Time for another drink of water. Oh, there we go. Anyway, starting in 1940 and going out through the rest of the Golden Age and well into the Silver Age, and some would even argue into the Bronze Age, Batman comics kind of had this kind of lighthearted, adventurous feel. It wasn't so much about gritty urban crime, although there were still occasionally a couple of more serious stories, but the overall tone of Batman was one of more colorful adventure, costumed adventure. It wasn't the dark, serious kind of psychological take on Batman that we're all so used to today. This particular collection of Batman stories collects 7 stories that are fit in that particular vein. So that kind of gives you an idea of the kind of tone of stories. If you're looking for kind of the dark, serious, gritty Batman that, is all the rage in the movies and the games, this might not be to your taste, but that doesn't mean that these stories aren't any good. In fact, what I really like about this collection, of the many things I like about it, and we'll get into that as we get into the stories, it really demonstrates to me that Batman can work on a variety of levels. He doesn't necessarily have to be dark and serious for his stories to be effective and entertaining. He works best when his stories are dark and serious. I think we all know that by this point, but you can also have there's room for fun and adventure in Batman stories. You can have a little bit more of a lighthearted, fun take. It's not necessarily the best way to do it, and it's certainly not the way that I prefer, but I think it just illustrates the immense dynamic range and flexibility Batman has as far as the kind of stories you can tell with him. So, this first issue of the Batman Annuals, or as it's properly known, the giant-sized 80-page Batman Annual number 1, take a deep breath. The theme for this particular issue is called 1001 Secrets of Batman and Robin. Spoilers, there are not 1001 individual things revealed about Batman and Robin in this story, or in this collection. However, the basic theme is still got across that this particular issue collects 7 stories that don't so much. They kind of talk about, the trappings of Batman. This is a really good collection, actually, for people who are looking to get into, like, want to kind of get a better idea of who Batman is and what all the specifics are, the trappings of all his individual stories. The first story is this, like I said, this issue collects together 7 stories. The first story is called How to Be the Batman, in which Batman loses his memory and forgets that he's Batman, and Robin has to reteach him how to be Batman, which is quite entertaining. The second story is called The Strange Costumes of Batman, where we learn about all the different kinds of, specialized bat suits that Batman uses in his work. And this particular story puts Batman in a situation conveniently where he gets to use all of them, so we get to see him put on all these different kind of cool Batman outfits, and we'll talk about that when we get there. This next one is one I really like, Untold Tales of the Bat Signal. One of my favorite things about I love the bat signal. I love the imagery of that thing. I love the idea that we summon this dark avenging hero by shining his beacon into the sky. I don't know why, just that I've always kind of had a real love and fascination with the imagery of the bat signal. And this particular story collects together a couple of different little mini stories. It's kind of more like an anthology issue. That talks about different little mini stories that have involved the bat signal and how the bat signal itself has kind of become a big part of the Gotham City mythology, not just having to do with Batman's mythology. The Origin of the Batcave is the next story in this issue. This story I'm not 100% in love with. Spoilers, it deals with time travel, and it deals with not so politically correct depictions of Native Americans, but then again, this was the 1950s, not a time known for its political correctness, as we all know. But it's interesting as a historical artifact, and and it does go into some detail about the caverns that exist beneath the Wayne estate. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, I think this particular story is the first story to actually specifically say that the caverns, the caves in which Batman, does his work, were actually like ancient pre-existing caverns that have always been beneath the Wayne property. I think before that they kind of intimated that he had dug them, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong about that. That could be more of like a later development, but in any case, the next story this is another great one, The Batman's Electronic Crime File. This is where we get a glimpse into how Batman uses cutting-edge technology, which, in 1950s was a punch card machine, but it was mind-blowing technology in the 1950s, and how he uses high-tech technology to do his crime-fighting work. And that story was really interesting. It was kind of ahead of its time. And the 50s is really the beginning of the trend that we now associate. Batman's always known as one of the real high-tech superheroes. He has the most advanced technology to bring to bear in his battle against crime. And that trend and that idea really started in the 1950s, and that really became one of the reasons I think why Batman has had such longevity, because you can always update his technology and gives him kind of a fresh, new... There's kind of like an exciting newness to his character, even though he's been around for so long, because he's always got the latest high-tech gear at his disposal. The next story is called The Thrilling Escapes of Batman and Robin. This one's okay. It kind of goes into detail about how Batman and Robin escape from death traps. That's always fun to see, but, it's not my favorite story in the issue. The final one is pretty interesting. The Amazing Inventions... I can't talk today worth a damn. Water. That's my cue. There we go. The final story in this first collection we're going to look at today is The Amazing Inventions of Batman. This particular story talks about all the kind of... Again, it kind of goes into more detail about the gadgets that Batman uses, and a lot of them may have some significance in future Batman stories. We'll talk more about that when we get there. So... when I was considering how I was going to talk about each of these stories individually, I thought about doing what a lot of podcasts do, and that is kind of briefly summarizing the narrative and then talking about the things I liked about it, talking about the things I didn't like about it, giving it a rating, yada, yada, yada. But I feel like you really don't get a good sense of how the story is unless you actually can follow along the narrative. And with that in mind, I'm going to try something a little different that other podcasts have done, not always successfully because it's kind of risky. I'm just going to try it for this. This is the first episode of the show where I've really looked in detail at some comics. So I'm going to try this. I'm going to see how it goes. What I'm going to do for you, my listeners, assuming I have listeners, is I'm actually going to present you with a quasi-dramatic reading of each story. Now, these stories are fairly short. Let's see, the first story in this collection, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. It's only 12 pages. Comic book stories back in the Golden and Silver Ages were shorter. That's because most comics back then were not so much like, nowadays it's kind of like, one issue, one story that fills the entire issue. Back in the Golden and Silver Ages, comic books were thicker. They were usually about 40 to 60 pages. And the comic book stories they presented, usually they were anthologies. They were collections of several stories. So if you bought an issue of Detective Comics, you get a Batman story that was about 8 to 12 pages. And then maybe you get a Slam Bradley story or a Crimson Avenger story. You get like a couple of different stories in each issue. As time went on and, budgets changed and the way comic books were made changed, they kind of honed it down to what we have today where, like I said, it's one issue with one story, maybe a backup feature in the end, but that's pretty much all you get. Back then, comic book stories were shorter so they could pack more different stories into each issue. So the first story is only about 12 pages long, and I'm just going to give you, like I say, a kind of a quasi-dramatic reading of it and try to convey to you what it would be like if you were actually reading the story. Now, if you would actually like to read the story and maybe even follow along with me, I advise caution because I've never done this before, so I can't make any guarantees about the quality of said endeavor. But like I said, you can read these issues in a couple different ways. You can do it, if you have tons and tons of money and tons of time, you can do it the old-fashioned way and try to go online or go to comic book stores and try to fish through old back issue bins and try to find these original comic books, but that's probably going to cost you thousands and thousands of dollars. And that's not really, hey, I'm not going to try to tell you what to do. If you want to spend that kind of money on comics, who am I to judge? But there's easier ways to do it. You could you could buy them digitally and download them and read them that way. You could purchase this collection that I have right here, the Batman Annuals Volume 1, again from the DC Comics Classics Library. Or, maybe if you're the kind of person who's a law-breaking, person, maybe you could find other ways to read these comics that I'm not going to endorse in any way, shape, or form on this particular show. But if you don't want to read along with me, that's fine. I'll try to make it as exciting as I can. So, let's see here. Pull up the first page. I should be more prepared than this, but again, never tried anything like this before, so we're going to see how it goes. Alrighty, we're going to take a real quick break. I'm going to get myself all prepared here, and then when I come back, we are going to start my dramatic reading of the 80-page giant Batman Annual number 1's first story, How to Be the Batman. On our opening page, we see Batman and Robin standing on the rooftops of Gotham City. And on the street below, you can see what looks like police officers engaged in a deadly gunfight with what I assume are some dastardly criminals. And it looks like Batman is somewhat nervous and scared about swinging down from the rooftop to join the fray. And the caption says, "Most dreaded of all Crookdom's foes is the Batman. His brilliant genius in detective deduction, his marvelous acrobatic agility and skill, his limitless knowledge of crimesters' tricks have made him and Robin the terror of the underworld. But what if Batman forgot all these great talents? It seems incredible, but it happens when his mind blanks out and Robin has to teach him how to be the Batman." And then you got a little word bubble that has Robin says, "Swing down on the rope, Batman, the way I taught you." Oh, that's a good way to get your attention in the story, isn't it? I'm interested so far. The very first panel of our story shows Gotham City at nighttime, and in the middle of the sky, the bat signal is lighting up the night sky, and it says, "In the dark hours when crime invades the streets of Gotham City, a fateful beam stabs the midnight sky, the bat signal." That's right, folks. This issue is where the opening narration of the theme song comes from. That's one of the reasons I wanted to do it so much. And next we see Bruce Wayne and Dick Grayson in their civilian guises in Wayne Manor looking out the window, and they see the bat signal, and it says, "And Bruce Wayne and Dick Grayson must again resume the secret identities in which they tirelessly battle wrongdoers." And Bruce says, "The bat signal, and I'd count it on a quiet evening." And Dick Grayson says, "Commissioner Gordon wants us. We better become Batman and Robin, fast." And then we see the Batcave, and inside the Batcave we see parked the Batmobile, and it's that great old 1950s Batmobile, the really ridiculously huge one with the huge bat head shaped battering ram on the front of it and the big glass bubble on the top with a little siren on top. I love that old 50s Batmobile. Caption says, "Moments later, from the hidden Batcave beneath the Wayne Mansion, an ominous shape roars forth." Batman says, "I wonder what it is this time." And Robin says, "Something big, or they wouldn't use that signal. We'll soon know." Batman, this is the caption. I'll have to say like the caption in Batman and Robin, identify the characters as they speak. But the caption says, "Batman, little can you guess what grim, ironic fate is hatching for you at this time. A fateful end to your whole career." And then we see Batman bursting into Commissioner Gordon's office, and there's a couple other guys in there, and it says, "At Commissioner Gordon's office." You hear Batman say, "What is it, Commissioner?" Commissioner says, "Something strange, Batman. This man is the night watchman at the Ajax Importing Company, which was robbed an hour ago. He's forgotten everything about himself." And Batman says, "A blow on the head can sometimes cause amnesia." But then a doctor who's also in the office says, "Yes, but this man has not been stunned. There's no sign of injury." The next panel has the night watchman, or the commissioner, I'm guessing, saying, "When our men got there, they found the watchman bereft of his senses." And then we see a flashback panel of the night watchman at this warehouse, and the police are bursting in saying, "Too late, the thieves are gone, but what's the matter with the guard?" And the guard's saying, "Who am I? What am I doing here? I can't remember." And then back in Commissioner Gordon's office, the guard says, "I can remember nothing except waking up on the floor. Then the policeman came." And Batman says, "This is strange. A man doesn't lose all memory for no reason. I think I'll take him to Dr. Everett's, the psychologist." And then the next day at Dr. Everett's office, Dr. Everett's, the psychologist, I'm assuming, says, "No injury, no symptoms of shock. It's amazing. I wish I could have Dr. Sampson's opinion on this, but it's possible, of course." And Batman says, "Dr. Sampson? Yes, I remember him well. The most brilliant psychologist in Gotham City, who was sentenced to prison for malpractice." Dr. Everett says, "A great loss to science. He was recently released, but hasn't contacted his old colleagues." Batman says, "Perhaps I can find him. In the meantime, I'd like to make some tests of my own." And then back in the Batcave's crime laboratory, we see Batman doing some work with some chemistry sets, and he's doing some testing, and he's thinking to himself, "These tiny blood samples from the Watchmen may tell something if I analyze them." But then Robin bursts into the room and he says, "The police radio just reported a burglary alarm at the Herbert Jewelry Company, Batman." Batman says, "It may be Sampson's band striking again. We better get there fast." And then we see the Batmobile roaring across the street with the big yellow full moon in the background and the purple sky. It looks so cool. And Robin says, Samson, you mean the psychologist who was disgraced and sent to jail is behind the robbery? I've reason to think so. I'll tell you when we've answered the alarm. And then we see the outside of this jewelry store, and we can hear the big bong of the jewelry alarm going off. And then there's a couple of cops that are already there, and Batman and Robin run out. And the cop says, we found no one here and nothing gone, Batman. The alarm wires have short-circuited. We're fixing them now. And Robin says, then we had our trip for nothing, and we might as well go. You don't think it's suspicious or anything, but no, Robin's just like, well, there's nothing here. I guess we're just going to leave. Then the caption box says, but when the alarm wires are repaired and the duo and the police have left, we see around the corner a couple of shifty-looking criminal-type characters, and one of them says, I don't get it, Dr. Samson. First we set off a false alarm by jimmying the wires and draw the law here. Now you want to stage a real robbery. And a big guy in a yellow trench coat behind him, who I assume is Dr. Samson, says, psychology can deceive anybody, as you'll see. And then we see these bad dudes breaking into this safe in this jewelry store, and you hear the big bong of the jewelry store alarm going off, and one of the crooks says, there goes the safe's burglar alarm again. But Dr. Sampson says, but this time, figuring it's only wiring again, they won't be so fast answering it. Knowing psychology will give us plenty of time to get away. But then suddenly Batman and Robin burst into the room, and Batman says, but since I suspected a psychologist planned this, I decided to stick around. Batman and Robin only pretended to go away. Don't worry, we can take care of them. And then one of the bad guys pulls what I guess is like a big curtain or a big kind of wall hanging or something. They pull it off the wall and they throw it at Robin, and Robin gets all tangled up in it. And one of the bad guys says, that'll hold the brat. Come on, boys. And you can hear Robin say, I'm tangled, but you can nab them, Batman. Dick Grayson, one of the greatest acrobats the world has ever known, can't get out of a tangled up curtain or something. Golden Age comics. We'll get there. But anyway, Batman says, I will. Psychology won't help them now. But this is the caption. But when a moment later, Robin frees himself and dashes to join the pursuit. You see Robin jumping into the room, and he says, Batman, they're getting away. We've got to catch them. And Batman says, Who? Who are you? Batman, what's the matter with you? Batman? Who is Batman? Who am I? So Batman's lost his memory, which, I'm sure is a surprise to absolutely nobody. And Robin thinks the same thing that happened to the Watchman. Batman has lost his memory. But why? How? And Batman is standing there and looks all confused, and they've illustrated it really well with all these big colorful question marks, these red and yellow question marks all over his head to illustrate how confused he is. And he says, why am I wearing these clothes and this mask? And then you see Robin walking Batman back to the Batmobile, and he says, come along, I better get you home. It'll all come back to you soon. But then he thinks, or will it? That Watchman didn't recover, but Batman must regain his memory. And Batman says, what a weird car. Is it yours? It's really funny. So Batman and Robin go back to the Batcave, and Batman says, but why did we come to this cave? Well, Robin says, can't you remember the Batcave? It's our secret base. No one else on Earth knows its location. Come on, look at it and you'll remember. And he shows Batman around the Batcave, and he shows him the Batplane, and he says, see the Batplane that you designed, and beyond it is our laboratory. But Batman says, it's all new to me. Are you sure I'm this, what did you call him, Batman? And Dick Grayson shows him the trophy room, and you can see the big penny and the big dinosaur in the trophy room. And he says, see our trophy room. Can't you remember any of these cases these trophies represent? The dummy dinosaur from Dinosaur Island, the big penny from the Penny Plunderer case. It's a nice little touch, showing us some continuity, some of the older stories. I particularly like the case of the Penny Plunderers. That's a good one. But Batman says, they're weird, but they don't mean anything to me. What am I anyway, a museum collector or what? Again, it's funny, because really, if you were Batman and you lost your memory and someone started showing you around your Batcave, you're like, what do I do for a living? Am I a computer designer? Do I collect weird stuff? What is this all about, and why am I in this outfit? And Robin says, you're a detective. the greatest detective on Earth. And your career mustn't be ended by amnesia. I won't let it be ended. Batman says, but I can't remember anything about detective work, and why are we going up this stair? And Robin brings him into Wayne Manor from below the Batcave. And he shows him around Wayne Manor. He says, this is the mansion of Bruce Wayne, millionaire playboy, under which the Batcave is hidden. And you are Bruce Wayne. That's the secret identity of the Batman. Batman says, it doesn't make sense. If I'm a millionaire, why should I secretly be a detective? And then, this is I love this part, because Robin breaks it down. I'll tell you why you're Batman. And he says, perhaps if I tell you your own past, it'll all come back to you. Your career, Batman's career, started when you were just a boy. You and your parents one night. And then we get these wonderful flashbacks, 6 panels of flashbacks of Robin recounting the origin story of Batman. And this first panel, you see Joe Chill, the criminal, holding up the Waynes as they're walking home from a movie. And Robin's voiceover says, you were stopped by a hoodlum bandit, and when your father resisted, and you hear Joe Chill say, I'll take that necklace you're wearing, lady. And Thomas Wayne, don't you dare lay a hand on my wife. And little Bruce is shouting, Dad, look out, he's going to shoot. And then the next panel is Robin's voiceover that says, that hoodlum's single shot killed both your parents, for Martha Wayne's weak heart could not stand seeing her husband shot down. Okay, so most of you are probably thinking to yourself, no, the guy shoots both his mom and his dad. And that is how it was presented in the original story. In the original version of Batman's origin story from Detective Comics, I want to say 35, I think it was? Yes. Detective Comics number 35, in the original version of the origin story, the killer does shoot both his mom and his dad. But when the origin story was retold in Batman number 47 from 1945, they altered it slightly to make, because, by the time the mid-40s had rolled around, comic books were aimed mostly, entirely at children. And so they kind of thought that, having a guy shoot a woman in cold blood is a bit, it's a bit harsh, it's a bit violent. So they changed it to where Thomas Wayne gets shot, and then Martha Wayne, overcome by the emotion of the moment, has a heart attack and drops dead. It's less violent, but it's also not nearly as, effective, I don't think. But that's how it was. And that version of the origin story went all the way up until the 80s, believe it or not. So it was like 40 years where, Joe Chill shoots his dad, his mom has a heart attack, and it really isn't until Frank Miller does The Dark Knight Returns, maybe a little bit before that, but not really until Frank Miller does The Dark Knight Returns, that he brings the idea of both of his parents being shot back into the public consciousness, and that's the way it's kind of stayed to this day. Interesting bit of trivia. But then anyway, the next panel is you see young Bruce Wayne standing over the graves of his parents. And Robin's voiceover says, that was when you, Bruce Wayne, made the grim resolution that was to determine your whole life. And little Bruce says, I'll dedicate my life and inheritance to bringing criminals like the one who killed you to justice. And the next panel, you see Bruce Wayne is older, is probably a young man. He's working in a laboratory. He's studying some chemicals. And he says, I've got to know science thoroughly to become a scientific detective. And I mustn't neglect my gym work. I'll need perfect acrobatic skill for my all-out war on crime. It's pretty badass. Robin's voiceover says, when you were ready to take up your role in life, you chose a disguise that would strike terror into superstitious criminals. And you see the famous panel of Bruce Wayne sitting in his study, and a bat flies in through his window. And he says, a bat, that's it. I'll become a bat. An eerie figure of the shadows. A Batman. See? Clever. I guess. Then you see Robin saying again in another panel, he says, when my parents, the Flying Grace and acrobats, were killed like yours due to crime, you adopted me as your ward and trained me in all your skills, Batman. And then we're back to the present, and Batman is just looking really confused and lost, and they have kind of like the little swirls of dizziness above his head, you know what I'm talking about, to show that he's really, kind of lost in this whole conversation. And Robin says, "Surely you remember all the cases we've worked on as Batman and Robin. Try to remember." But Batman says, I can't. I'm no detective, since I can remember nothing now of what I knew. You'll have to go on without me. Robin says, "No, I won't let the great career of Batman end like this. Since you can't remember your former skills, I'll teach them to you again, just as you taught me." And Batman says, "I'll try to learn, though I'm afraid it's hopeless." It's kind of a lame thing for Batman to say, but he's not really Batman. He's been psychologically compromised. And the caption says, "And so begins the re-education of Batman." And Robin's showing him his equipment and showing him stuff, and he says, "You've seen our various costumes for different jobs. Now you can study your utility belt, which carries your rope and a two-way radio and all the gadgets you dreamed up." And Batman's looking all sweaty and nervous, and he's like, "I don't see how I can remember all these things." And then cut to, and Batman and Robin are in their gym clothes, and they're in the gym and they're working out, and Robin's trying to teach him how to fight again. And Batman says, "All right, I'll grab you as though you were a crook, since you asked me to." Oof! And Robin tackles him. And Robin says, "Yes, but you have to watch out for dirty tricks like this." It's so 40s. I love it. And then in the next one, we see Batman swinging through the gym on a rope. And he's managing it. And he says, "For a minute, I thought I was going to fall." And Robin says, "Your muscles are so well trained, they respond automatically. It's only your mind that doesn't remember, and makes you timid." I'm sorry, I'm rereading it wrong. Basically, what he's implying there is that even though Batman can't mentally remember what's going on, his body has still retained enough of his muscle memory to allow him to be able to do some things, but not many things. And Robin thinks, he learns fast, but there'll never be time to teach him everything before we go into action again. And the next panel has the bat signal shining over the city of Gotham again, and the caption says, "That time that Robin dreads comes far too soon." And you hear Batman say, "Look, that strange light in the sky with the figure of a bat. What does it mean?" "It's the bat signal, and it means we're wanted as Batman and Robin. Come on!" And you see Batman and Robin are racing into Gotham City in the Batmobile again. And then you hear Batman say, "And you think this Samson person you told me about somehow caused my amnesia, Robin?" Robin says, "He must have, Batman. If only you could remember. You were investigating another case just before it happened to you." And then at Commissioner Gordon's office, Commissioner Gordon says, "Samson has sent threats to John Otis, the famous stamp collector, warning him that his collection will be taken and we better not resist." And Robin says, "Why, that collection is second only to Walter Nelson's. It's worth thousands," which is, was a lot of money back in the 1940s and 50s. Commissioner Gordon says, "Exactly. We've sent police to guard it, and I suggest that you two go with them." And then Batman thinks to himself, "Robin told me to pretend nothing had happened to me," and he says, "Certainly, Commissioner, will be glad to." Then the Batmobile drives away, and Robin says, "Don't you get it, Batman? Samson is a psychologist and uses psychological twists in his crimes. It's not the Otis collection he's after at all. It's the Nelsons, more valuable one. But I don't see why he'd threaten the wrong man then." And Robin says, "Partly to mislead the police, but mostly to alarm Nelson into moving his own collection to a place of safety lest he be next. I hope I won't," and then Batman says as they're approaching the house, "I hope I won't let you down too badly, Robin." What a wet rag. So basically what they're saying here is this psychologist guy has been robbing places is saying, "Oh, I'm going to go steal the collection of this guy, and don't you dare try to stop me," obviously thinking that the police will try to stop him, so they won't be on guard of the guy who's actually got the most valuable collection of stamps in Gotham City. I guess stamp collecting was a big thing back in those days. So Robin cleverly thinks, it's probably a diversion, and we're gonna go. He's probably going after the more expensive collection, so that's where we should head. That's where they head. And as Batman and Robin pull up, there's a whole bunch of crooks all over the house getting ready to rob it. But they jump out of the car, and Robin swings from a tree and kicks a gun out of a crook's hand, and he says, But Batman's not doing a very good job, and Robin says, "No, Batman, use your rope like I showed you and disarm them with your feet." And then Batman, this is hilarious, Batman says, "Stop, I'm Batman, and I, oop!" And somebody punches him in the back of the head, because he doesn't know what he's doing. It's funnier than it should be. And then you hear Samson say, "You're not Batman, not anymore. Come on, boys." And then there's a car speeding at Batman and Robin, and then Robin says, "Do a backflip, Batman, do a back, oh no!" And then the speeding car clips Batman and knocks him over. And then the next panel, we see Batman lying on the ground, totally, wiped out. And he says, "They got away." And then we see the guy who I assume is Walter Nelson, the famous stamp collector. And he's standing there all confused, saying, "Who am I?" And Robin says, "And left Nelson without a memory in the same weird way." So not only have these guys robbed this guy, defeated Batman and Robin, but they've taken this guy's memory as well. And later, back at Commissioner Gordon's office, this is hilarious. This is one of those scenes you could only get away with in a Golden Age / Silver Age comic book, where Commissioner Gordon stands there, he's looking all important and official, and he's smoking a cigar in his office, and he says, "Batman, you failed badly. I can't understand it. What's happened to you?" And Batman's standing there sweaty and shaky, which is like, I'll be all right next time. And Commissioner Gordon says, "There'll be no next time for you. You failed us, and we'll have to catch Samson this time without you. You'd only be in the way." And then Robin says, "Come along, Batman." And they have to walk away in shame, like they just failed their test in high school. And the principal's like, "Well, we're not going to let you help us again." It's you got to remember, back in those days, this was like post-World War II, and culturally, people had a much higher opinion of authority figures than maybe we do these days. So Batman, back in those days, in the late 40s, early 50s, was working directly with the police department. He was essentially, just like in the 60s TV show, a duly deputized agent of the law. So Commissioner Gordon probably had the right to, put him off the case, say, "You don't know what you're doing. You've completely..." I mean, he failed one time. Let's completely ignore all the hundreds of other times that Batman's come through for you, Commissioner Gordon, and done amazing things. He screws up one time and you're like, "Well, you're no good. Get out of my office. I can't have you helping me on this case." It's a bit harsh. It's a bit cold. But, it adds to the drama of the moment, I suppose. What are you going to do? Anyway, the next page, Batman is saying to himself, or saying to Robin, "I know now I'm through. You could be a great detective without me hampering you, Robin. From now on, it will be Robin, not Batman and Robin, against crime." And then Robin's standing there, and he's literally crying. And he says, "No, Batman, I couldn't replace you. Nobody could. Your great scientific skill could have solved this amnesia mystery. You were working on it in the lab when you were interrupted, but had no time to tell me anything. And then you lost all memory." And then Batman says, "Wait, maybe we could find out what I learned I'm sorry, folks, I'm getting dry-mouthed again. Batman says, "Maybe we could find out what I learned when I still had my memory. Let's look in the lab." And, they go to the lab, and they start looking. And Robin says, "You were studying blood samples from that amnesia-stricken watchman, but you made no notes here, so we don't know what you found." Batman says, "But that pencil indicates I did make notes. If you interrupted me, I might have hastily put them in my pocket. We'll see." And Batman checks inside of his pocket. I guess nobody's thought to have him do that until now. And he pulls out a piece of paper with some formula on it, and a little bit of writing, and he says, "This seems to be my handwriting. These must be the notes I made." And Robin says, "There's nothing but a chemical formula, and the words, 'check on diffusion filters to find S.'" And Batman says, "I don't know what they mean, but my guess is that the chemical formula was an antidote I worked out for the strange amnesia I was studying. Robin, I'm going to mix that formula and try it on myself." And Robin, quite, understandably, is horrified. He's like, "Batman, it's too risky. Your guess could be wrong." The next panel is we see Batman working up some chemicals. So somehow he remembers how to do chemistry and nothing else. Okay. Batman's mixing up some chemicals, and the caption says, "But the desperate Batman mixes the unknown formula." And Robin says, "I know you'd risk anything to regain your memory, but this is too dangerous." And Batman says, "I've got to take the chance." And then Batman drinks the potion, but nothing happens. Batman says, "Nothing happened. I still can't remember anything. Then it wasn't an amnesia antidote after all, Robin. It's hopeless." Robin says, there's still the other clue. We might still find Samson, S, through it. Diffusion filters are big, costly equipment. We'll check up on them as you had planned. And then later on, Batman and Robin go to a chemical supply firm. You know, the local chemical supply firm. And the guy who owns the firm says, "Yes, we did sell one of these gas diffusion filters not long ago. It was delivered to a party at 13 Green Street." Because, when two guys in costumes, colorful costumes, come into your place and say, "Hey, when was the last time you sold one of these diffusion filtering machines?" You're obviously going to go, "Well, let me give you a complete record of all of our recent transactions and who we sold them to and what their mailing address is, because you seem like some trustworthy guys." But I guess back then, Batman and Robin were working more closely with the police, so it kind of makes sense. Anyway, they go to check the address. And Batman and Robin burst into the room at 13 Green Street. And Samson and his goons are there. And Samson says, "Better surrender, Batman, or my bomb of amnesia gas will destroy Robin's memory too." And Batman says, "We've got to do it, Robin. I've blundered again, and I can't let you become like me." And Batman. Next panel, we see Batman's been tied up to a post, and Robin's being manhandled by some goons. And Robin says, "So it was amnesia gas you used on your victims." And Samson, the evil scientist, says, "Yes, my great scientific discovery of a gas that obliterates the memory. Now we're going to use it for our biggest coup, and you shall help us. We're going to grab the currency shipment slated to leave the airport today. With you along, no one will suspect us until we strike. You'll agree, or Batman will lose his life as well as his memory." And Robin is, again, crying. This kid cries a lot. He says, I guess I'll have to do it. I'll go along." Even though Batman says, "No, Robin, no." And in the caption, "As the psychologist Crook departs with Robin, agonizing minutes pass for the Batman." Batman's still tied up to the post, and there's a Crook sitting in a chair across from him with his gun trained on him, so Batman doesn't try any funny stuff, And Batman thinks to himself, "My head, it's swimming. Must do something to get Robin clear." And Batman says to the guard, "If you let me go, I'll give you my greatest treasure, my utility belt." And the Crook says, "Say, I've heard of that belt. You'll give it to me, but you're not going anywhere." So he's gonna take the belt and, still not free Batman. And so the thug unties Batman. The caption says, "As the thug unties Batman for a moment so he can remove the precious belt." I don't know why the thug didn't just remove the belt. You didn't have to untie Batman. I guess maybe he was like, if I try to remove the belt with Batman still tied up, there might be a booby trap on it? I don't know. Well, he unties Batman so Batman can take the belt off. And the guard says, "Now take off that belt and toss it to me and I'll tie you up again. I wouldn't take this chance if you hadn't lost your know-how." And Batman is reaching down for his belt. And he says, "Here's the belt. And a tear gas capsule I had hidden in one of its pockets." Batman pulls out a gas capsule from his belt and throws it at the Crook, and poof! A big old cloud of tear gas envelops the room. And the Crook says, "Hey, you weren't supposed to remember things like that. I don't get it. I can't see." And then there's the next panel. We see Samson's car racing towards the airport, but the Batmobile driven by Batman cuts him off. And Batman says, "Not so easily this time." And you can hear Samson say, "Batman, he got loose somehow, but we can easily handle him." But Batman does this crazy acrobatic maneuver. It looks like he grabs him out of the car and does a flip. or something. And well, anyway, Batman says, I always liked this stunt when I had to deal with fast crooks like you. And you can hear Samson scream, Why? Why, he's himself again. He remembers. And then Batman grabs Samson and uses him as he swings him around and slams him into the other crook in the car, knocking them both unconscious. Yes, folks, Batman beat a motherfucker with another motherfucker, as only Batman can. And Batman says, Yes, Samson, I remember, and you and your pals are going to remember me for a long time in prison. And then Robin jumps out of the car, Samson's car, and he says, But Batman, how did you get your memory back? Your antidote didn't work. And Batman says, It did work, Robin, but not immediately. It took a few hours to act, and my memory came back to me as I was tied up. We can use it now to restore Samson's other victims. And then Batman and Robin are standing there, and Batman's arm is around Robin's shoulders, and they're both smiling, and Robin says, That's swell, and I won't have to teach Batman how to fight crime. The end. Well, now, wasn't that a fun little story? I like this story for a couple of reasons. First of all, aside from the fact that it's just full of that, wonderful Silver Age, late Golden Age, early Silver Age goofiness, it's fun to read. It's actually reasonably well written. There are a lot of stories from that era that aren't very well written. They're kind of, the plots make absolutely no sense, and there's a lot of, nothing that anybody does has any reason behind it. This story, it's not perfect. It's got some leaps, but it's, it's decent. It's fairly well written. I enjoy it. It's fun. For the purposes of this particular issue, though, I really enjoy it because it's kind of a good introduction to who Batman is. It's a good way to introduce a reader, especially a reader back in those days. Okay, this is Batman. He's Bruce Wayne. He, has a bat cave. He's got a Batmobile. He's got a sidekick named Robin. I like how they go into the origin story. Very brief, kind of abbreviated version of the origin story, but it's there to explain why he does what he does, where he got the idea for the Batman costume, a really short kind of one-panel version of where Robin came from. He was a circus acrobat. His parents died by crime. Batman took him under his wing. It's got some cool... It's got some cool action, some cool fight sequences. I do love that moment at the end where Batman throws Samson, the evil psychologist, into the other gangster to knock them both out. I think that's pretty fun. It's got some pretty funny, goofy moments, like when Commissioner Gordon basically kicks Batman off the case and says, "You're not allowed to help us anymore, Batman. You would only get in the way." Since when has Batman ever needed your permission to do anything, Jim? But again, it was that time, different time. Authority figures were the authority figures in comics, and that's who you listen to, gosh darn it. I also like the artwork in this story, particularly those opening panels. The bat signal looks amazing. I've again, love the bat signal. I love the way it looks, particularly back in the Golden Age. They just drew it in this very simple, bright, colorful, bold way that really leaps off the page. This story is a good way. Again, this whole issue, the whole first issue of the Batman annuals, to me, is a kind of a good introduction to Batman. It kind of tells you everything you need to know about Batman's trappings, minus his villains, unfortunately. But we'll get to that in another issue, another day. But overall, I quite enjoyed this issue, and I think that dramatic reading went rather well, if I do say so myself. I could have certainly done a lot worse. We'll see how it goes. Maybe I'll do another one in the future. Speaking of the future, I had no idea that it was going to take me that much time to read that issue. Gosh, this episode's been going on for almost an hour now at this point. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a plug in this particular issue for now. And in future episodes, hopefully I'll be reading more stories from the first issue of the Batman annuals. I really want to do the Bat Signal one and Batman's Mechanical Crime File. Those are two really good stories. And hopefully, in future episodes we'll get to those. We definitely will. In future episodes, we will get to those issues, and I'll do more dramatic readings. But as far as this particular episode goes, I hope you guys enjoyed my little reading of that issue. And hopefully we'll get to do it again. We will. No more hopefullys. It's going to happen. I'm crossing a line into a sand. I'm making a candlelight vow just like Batman does, with the wax burning my hand, saying we will do more dramatic readings of Golden and Silver Age comic books. And not just Golden and Silver Age comic books in the future. It'll happen. It'll be great. It'll be fun. And who knows? Maybe I'll have some guests with me to help me read some of these issues. That would make it, I think, more effective to have different people doing the different voices. I know a couple of people who have experience in voice acting, so I think that would be a really fun and effective way to do it. But that's all for the future, folks. Thank you so much for listening today. And we will see you next time on Andy's Batman Podcast. Same pod time, same pod channel.
Later. Holy Halloween! You malodorous menace! You malodorous menace! You malodorous menace! Yeah, you rancid rat fink!